Chapter 39, Second Year, The Long Last Day, Part 2. The rest of the afternoon was nothing short of chaotic, and Remus knew that Sirius and James, wherever they were, must be having the time of their lives. Every single bathroom in the castle had been mysteriously affected by the foam flood, and no one seemed to be able to stop it for very long. Huge drifts of bubbles clogged the hallways like pink snow, and those students who didn't want to play in it did not appear to mind being forced out onto the grounds to loll about on the grass and spend their last day in the sunshine. Remus, who had already had to sacrifice his lunch hour, still needed to get to the library and return his books. Help Sirius pack, although, actually, he told himself as he pelted up the stairs to Gryffindor Tower, he had done quite enough to help Sirius for one day. And see Madame Pomfrey for an end-of-year check-up. He also needed to get to the Great Hall early enough to help James and Sirius with the final phase of their plan. It was not complex magic, but it was strong, and ideally needed as many wands as possible. Library first, he thought to himself purposefully, as he entered the now desolate common room. At least there was no one there to hold him up now. One of the others had obviously been in the dorm room since Remus had last left, because it was even messier than before, and the invisibility cloak was now missing. James, who was probably the tidiest of all four of them, had packed all of his things the night before, and neatly made his bed. Remus's space was tidy, only because it was now entirely empty except for his pyjamas and a book by his bedside table. Peter had apparently tried to pack at some point, but been disturbed halfway through. His trunk was flung open, various items of clothing hanging out of it, a pile of textbooks on his bed, and a red tie hanging from the frame. Sirius's bed was by far the worst. He must have come up looking for something at some point, because every drawer in his dresser was open, his bedsheets had been ripped back, and his trunk stood completely empty. Remus grabbed his book bag and left straight away. He would think about it later. He wished he still had the invisibility cloak, as he dodged Peeves once more. The poltergeist was in his element, diving into the piles of foam, then bursting out at unsuspecting children and teachers. Remus briefly remembered what McGonagall had said that morning about his father. Boggarts? Poltergeists? He wondered what his father, his dueling champion Ravenclaw father, who had had a temper, thought of Peeves. "Good afternoon, Madam Pince," Remus said quietly and respectfully as he entered the library. It was almost entirely empty, and the pinched-faced old librarian was sorting through a towering pile of recently returned books with her wand, firing them back to their shelves with great relish. "Lupin?" she said, not even turning her head to greet him. He placed his books carefully on the counter furthest from her. Though the library no longer frightened him exactly, Remus was still pretty nervous around Madame Pince, who would clearly have preferred that no student be permitted to touch her precious books at all. "Is that all of them?" she said sharply. "I shall know, if not." "Definitely all of them," he said, backing away slowly. "Mr. Pettigrew has not returned Poisonous Plants of the British Isles, and the elder Mr. Black has 3 overdue Transfiguration books." "Oh, okay, I'll let them know when I see them. I shall be writing to their parents if they don't have them back by 5 o'clock. I'll tell them," he repeated, almost out of the door. Sighing with relief, he made his way to the hospital wing at a leisurely pace, fighting the urge to throw himself headlong into a snowball fight the Hufflepuffs were having against the Slytherins with the foam. It seemed that the spell was still growing strong. Even more bubbles were emanating from the bathrooms he passed, and if he wasn't much mistaken, they were growing larger. He had no idea where Sirius, James and Peter were at the moment, but he knew they had to be enjoying themselves immensely. "Remus, dear," Madame Pomfrey smiled as he entered the hospital wing. "Thank you for stopping by. I know you'd much rather be having fun with your friends today." He shrugged us with a small smile. "I don't mind. Just a few things before the summer begins. Shall we go into my office?" He followed her in and accepted the plate of biscuits she offered him gratefully. His stomach was growling from having missed lunch. Now, Madame Pomfrey sat down, conjuring up his patient notes from thin air. I've tried contacting your matron at St. Edmund's a few times. It seems she's not clear on how the post works. Keeps trying to get me to speak to her on some muggle contraption. I told her we don't have telebone at Hogwarts, but I don't think she believes me. No, Remus stifled a laugh. She wouldn't. Anyway, between us, we've managed to agree that I shall be present before and after your confinement for both full moons. I've explained to her that your condition has become more difficult over the past year, but that there would be no danger to anyone else at the school. Right, Remus nodded. Now that he was used to the idea, he was quite glad Pomfrey would be there, however briefly, over the holidays. It would make the full moon slightly less grim, anyway. I want you to make sure you look after yourself in the meantime. Eat full meals and get a nice balance of rest and exercise. Remus didn't have the heart to tell Madame Pomfrey that he had very little say in when he was allowed to rest and how often he exercised while living at St. Edmund's. No one at Hogwarts seemed to understand what sort of an institution it was. After that, she checked on a few of his wounds from the previous moon to ensure that they were healing properly, then performed some diagnostic spells. It was almost 4 o'clock by the time he was walking back to Gryffindor, for what felt like the 100th time that day. Filch had had no success yet in taming the foam, but it at least stopped spurting from every tap and drain in the castle. The others must have got bored and moved on to something else. As Remus climbed the tower, he saw a few students flying past the window on their brooms. It was a gorgeous day outside. The other marauders were probably out there making the most of it too. He got a shock when he reached the dorm. "Hiya, Moony," James grinned at him. He was alone, on Sirius's side of the room. He was packing. "Nice job getting the umbrellas." "Yeah, well done on the foam. Filch is fuming." He rubbed the back of his head, feeling awkward. "Where's Sirius?" "Doing something mental on his broom, I think. Thought I'd sort this out for him." "Do you want help?" "Nah, don't worry. Didn't you want to read a book or something?" Remus shrugged. He felt a bit embarrassed now. It seemed right that James do it. After all, James was Sirius's best friend. "It's okay, I'll help you," he said casually, as if it didn't matter much either way. "I know you hate flying." "Nice of you," James smiled easily, gathering up some of Sirius's mess and sorting it quickly. Remus started tidying up the records, stacking in alphabetical order, because Sirius liked it that way. "Put those in my trunk," James said, nodding at the box of records. "The Muggle books too. Said I'd look after them for him. You know, the way things are with his mum and dad." Remus nodded, carrying them over to James's bed. "Going to be a rubbish summer without you two," James remarked, sounding genuinely sorry. "Yeah," Remus replied, not really sure what else to say. "Sirius thinks he might not be coming back in September." "What?" Remus looked up, suddenly, alarmed. James frowned. "Yeah, he reckons this thing with the betrothal, they might send him to Durmstrang. Keep him out of trouble until they can get him married. Pretty drastic, I think. But I wouldn't put it past them." "The betrothal ceremony might not happen, though," Remus said quickly. "I have a feeling. I just feel like Narcissa won't let it happen." He didn't want to tell James anything yet, because James would tell Sirius, and Sirius might get annoyed that Remus went behind his back to talk to his family. And what if it didn't even work? He couldn't get anyone's hopes up. "Narcissa?" James looked at him curiously. What are you talking about?" "I just know she doesn't want to marry Sirius any more than he wants to marry her. That's all." Remus shook his head. "Shall I pack his Muggle magazines in your trunk too?" "What a wonderful year it's been." Dumbledore beamed at the Great Hall, as the final scraps of the end-of-year feast vanished from their plates. Remus was going to miss the food more than anything, and had had 3 helpings of pudding. Ravenclaw had won the House Cup that year, and the hall was decked out in royal blue and bronze silk banners. Every time the Ravenclaw table had cheered during the meal, Remus had felt a tug behind his navel and thought of his father. Dumbledore's speech continued. "I am immensely proud of all of you, of course. Now that we are well fed, I have a few words I would like to say." "Ready, lads," Sirius whispered under his breath, so low that only the marauders could hear. Dumbledore continued. "Congratulations once again to Ravenclaw. Now, winning this year's house." There was a shriek from the far end of the hall, and everyone spun around to watch every single goblet on the Ravenclaw table start to spurt red and gold bubbles. They fired upwards, hitting the ceiling and bursting in a shower of bright droplets, which fell like rain onto the students below, staining their robes with streaks of Gryffindor crimson. "Keep going," Sirius whispered, his voice high with excitement, as the marauders flicked their wands using every ounce of concentration. Once again, the goblets on every other table erupted too, causing the same effect as students shrieked and began to duck for cover. Their hair, skin, and clothes stained vibrant red and gold. Not even the Gryffindor table had escaped. Not wanting to miss out on the fun, James had insisted on it. Lily Evans had brought her umbrella and grinned slyly at Remus as Mary and Marlene fought to cram underneath it with her. In the far corner of the hall, Remus caught sight of a furious Narcissa hiding underneath the table, her long white hair streaked with red and gold, which clashed awfully with her porcelain complexion. She was glaring at her wayward cousin so hard that Remus wondered how Sirius did not just drop dead on the spot. But he comforted himself with the thought that this incident can only have cemented the idea in her mind that she must escape marriage to Sirius at all costs. "Omnistratum," Dumbledore said calmly, aiming his wand at the ceiling. At once, the bubbles burst and evaporated into nothing, as though a large force field had suddenly appeared over their heads. "Scurify," the headmaster smiled pleasantly, now waving his wand over the whole hall. Instantly, the red and gold paint had vanished from the tables, floor, and students. Order was restored. "Ah," James sighed, sounding disappointed. "An excellent way to celebrate Gryffindor's victory on the Quidditch pitch this year." Dumbledore cleared his throat as students clambered back into their seats, eyeing their goblets nervously. "And while I welcome and encourage displays of house pride, I would like everyone to remember that true sportsmanship lies in the ability to gracefully cede victory. Please join me in raising your glasses to Ravenclaw, winners of the Hogwarts House Cup 1973. Remus had the uncomfortable feeling that, although Dumbledore did not look in the marauders' direction, they were absolutely the intended audience for his admonishment. He felt a little ashamed, but only a very little. It was hard to feel too sorry when they had really done no harm, and he was so full of excellent food. James and Sirius were already planning next year's finale, Peter grinning and nodding along like a simpleton. Lily winked at Remus as they raised their goblets, and he hoped that nothing would ever change. Chapter 40. Summer, 1973. Saturday, the 30th of June, 1973. Dear Remus, I've only been back at my parents' house for half an hour, and I've been told I'm bringing shame to my family 5 times. 5. 3 of those times weren't even from living people. The portraits of our ancestors have decided to have a go. Going to start putting up my Gryffindor stuff now, I think. Hope you got home okay. Sirius O. Black. Dear Sirius, your owl arrived before I even got back. We had to get 2 tubes and a bus. It took ages. Sorry about the family stuff. Be careful. Wish we were all back at school. Remus. Friday the 13th of July, 1973. Dear Mooney, come and visit soon. Me and Peter will die of boredom. Don't send Sirius any owls. His mother intercepted mine and returned them all with curses attached. Luckily, Dad spotted it before we had any trouble. But bloody hell. I might try contacting his cousin, a dromedare, to see how she gets post through. I think it's the Muggle way, but Godric knows how we're supposed to understand that. I haven't even opened my Muggle Studies book yet. Let me know if you can come and visit. Remember, Mum said any time. We can talk to your matron and Madame Pomfrey, the Minister for Magic, if we have to. James. Dear James, I know how the post works, but I have to nick some stamps, and I don't know what Sirius's address is. I asked Pomfrey over the last moon. She said no. She said the wizarding world is too dangerous to me. I don't know if she means if I'm the one that's dangerous. Sorry, mate. Mooney. Sunday, 5th of August, 1973. Dear Mooney, so, you will not believe what happened. Seriously. The ceremony was all ready to go. I was in my hideous green dress robes with black lace cuffs. Lace, Mooney, just wrap your mind around that. You would have thought I looked like a right prat. Regulus was there, my mother, father, and half of the family. Then in comes Narcissa, wearing something that looked like it belonged to my grandmother, and she didn't look happy. So I thought, well, fair enough, I'm not exactly thrilled either. But then she stands up in front of everyone and says, "We have to stop at once." So, everyone stops, and my mother looks like she's about to start spitting curses, and my uncle is asking Narcissa, "What do you think you're playing at?" And Regulus is grinning at me, and Bellatrix is grinning too, only she looks a bit more mental than Reg. Then Narcissa whispers something to her parents, and my aunt literally fainted, I shit you not. And everyone's muttering and whispering, and Mother can't take it anymore and demands to know what's going on. So Narcissa stands up and looks my mother in the eye and tells her she made an unbreakable vow to marry Lucius Malfoy as soon as she finishes her newts. I can't remember if I told you what an unbreakable vow is, but basically she can't not marry Malfoy now, or else they'd both drop dead. I don't know if I should be a bit offended on that point, to be honest. I mean, what does it say about you when a girl would rather die than marry you, even if she is your cousin? Anyway, as you can probably imagine, the whole Black family is at war. No one is talking to each other, because a few curses ended up being thrown between my dad and my uncle. I can't believe Narcissa. Seriously, I actually got close to liking her for a second, before I remembered she's still a Black, and a Slytherin, and she wants to marry Lucius, slimy git Malfoy, of all people. But it looks like I'm off the hook. There aren't any other cousins left for me to marry now. Everyone's furious, obviously, but for once, no one's furious at me. I think I'll probably be coming back to Hogwarts in September. I heard Mum talk about making Reg the heir instead. No skin off my nose. I couldn't care less about inheriting this foul house or their foul fortune. Rather they just leave me alone and keep ignoring me forever. Hope your holiday is going as well as mine. Though I can't see how it can be, because, honestly, what a bloody result, huh, Mooney? See you in a few weeks. Sirius O. Black. Monday the 6th of August, 1973. Dear Mooney, I bet Sirius has already told you the news, but just in case he hasn't. The betrothal is off. You were right. It came down to Narcissa in the end. Uncanny ability you have there, Rimu, old pal. Don't fancy giving me odds on the Quidditch World Cup next year, do you? Having a really boring summer all by myself. Pete's lot are all off seeing their French relatives. so I don't even have anyone here to help me practice my catches. Hope yours isn't too bad. I had a thought that maybe you could ask Madame Pomfrey to bring you to Diagon Alley in August. Or maybe we could meet you somewhere and drop you back afterwards. Mum keeps asking after you. She'd love to see you again. Get in touch if you can. Yours in eternal boredom, James. Monday the 13th of August, 1973. Postcard depicting the Eiffel Tower in spring. Dear Remus, bonjour, and all of that from France. Hope your holidays are good. Wish you lot were here. Peter. Remus responded to each of these communications with vigour, much more so than he had the year before. The marauders had seen enough of his handwriting to know how wonky it was, and he didn't think they'd mind a few spelling mistakes. He told James that he was very sorry, but he could not come to Diagon Alley. Madame Pomfrey said that it wasn't safe either, and wouldn't tell him why. And he congratulated Sirius on his hard-won bachelorhood, but did not tell him that he, Remus, had everything to do with it. It would be too much like boasting, and he didn't want Sirius to feel like he owed him anything. Remus's own summer was perhaps just as boring as James and Sirius's, but filled with more purpose than any summer before. Madame Pomfrey was true to her word, and arrived the evening before and the morning after each full moon. As such, he spent less time covered in bandages, and had more time to read and plan for his year ahead. When his books arrived, courtesy of Dumbledore and the Hogwarts second-hand bin, Remus was thrilled to be able to get a head start on his reading. Arithmancy was very difficult, but the challenge was exciting, and Care of Magical Creatures was utterly absorbing, if only because of the fantastic colour illustrations. Even Matron commented somewhat suspiciously that Remus had changed a great deal after 2 years away at school. "Nice to see you keeping out of trouble," she said one morning when she found him sitting at the bottom of the garden reading a heavy textbook using his magical sheet of acetate. At the time, Remus simply squinted up at her and smiled benignly. She, of course, had no idea that before the summer was over, he was to have committed his first serious crime. Ever since Christmas with the Potters, Remus had been plagued with one particular problem, and he wasn't sure how best to overcome it. Money. He didn't have any, muggle or wizard. Remus was as poor as you could possibly be. This had never mattered a great deal. After all, St. Edmund's supplied his basic needs, and Hogwarts gave him everything else. But he would have liked, at the very least, to be able to return the generosity his friends had shown him. They'd bought him countless sweets and gifts. Sirius had given him the ability to read, for goodness sake, and Lily single-handedly rescued his summer. For some time now, Remus had resolved to seek out the soonest opportunity that might result in payment. Fortunately for Remus, this opportunity presented itself one hot June afternoon. He was reading again, of course, sitting outside on a bench under the shade of an old pub umbrella, which must have been donated at some point since his first year. Now that he was 13, while Remus was not among the eldest boys at St. Edmund's, he was no longer at the bottom of the pile, and could generally escape being picked on too badly. A shadow fell over his book, and he looked up. Craig Newman, a 16-year-old skinhead, glared down at him. Craig's gang was the top of the pecking order at St. Eddie's. They all listened to reggae, wore bova boots and drainpipe jeans held up by suspenders. Some of them had tattoos, and all of them had bruises. "All right, Lupin?" Craig grunted at him. Remus blinked, slowly closing his book and wondering if it was much good as a weapon. It was heavy, anyway. "All right, Newman." He nodded, trying not to look small and scared. He slipped naturally back into his old accent over the summer, slurring words and dropping consonants. It was safest. "What you readin'?" Craig squinted down at the book, looking mistrustful. Remus wondered if Craig could read. He shrugged, nonchalantly. "Just something for school." "Yeah," Craig nodded. Remus didn't move a muscle. He couldn't understand what was happening. Did Craig really just want a casual chat? "You're clever, ain't ya?" the older boy said suddenly. Remus didn't know which response was more likely to get him beaten up, so he didn't answer at all. No matter, Craig didn't seem to mind. He just scratched his chin, then pulled a packet of cigarettes out of his shirt sleeve. "Yeah, you're clever, always reading and that." He lit the cigarette with a match from his boot, then offered Remus the packet. Remus reached out and took one. He'd never smoked before, but most of the boys at St. Edmund's did. Craig lit it for him, and Remus inhaled. His eyes filled with tears at once, and he tried desperately not to cough and splutter. It was disgusting. Craig looked at him with some amusement and continued. "Small too, skinny-like." "I suppose," Remus replied, coughing, watching Craig inhale and then trying to copy him. "Fancy coming on a job?" "Job?" Craig nodded, his tiny eyes fixed on Remus. "Yeah, you'd be good. Gonna do over the offie in town, tomorrow night. Ain't got no security. Ain't got nothink, except a dog. Going after the till and the booze. You can have a share. Just need you to pop through the back window." "Right," Remus nodded, as if the prospect did not utterly terrify him. He sucked on the cigarette again, out of habit this time. He could sort of see the appeal, once you got over the taste. He considered Craig's suggestion. On the one hand, it was bloody dangerous. Newman's gang weren't known for their finesse, and a few of them were already on probation. On the other hand, it did not seem as though he had much of a choice. When Craig Newman wanted you to do something, you sort of just had to do it. Plus, he could definitely benefit. Muggle money was all but useless to him, of course, but there might be a way. Remus looked Craig Newman in his little piggy eyes. "I just want fags." Craig smirked and nodded, and so Remus began his short career as a burglar. Chapter 41, 3rd Year, Home Again. Saturday the 1st of September, 1973. After the first job, Craig and his gang had been so pleased with Remus that they'd taken him along to 4 more, to houses and small businesses in the surrounding towns. Even without an invisibility cloak, Remus found that he just had a natural gift for getting into places he shouldn't. That's what Craig said anyway. Bloody natural, this kid. Nature was a funny thing. Remus found himself thinking on the way to King's Cross. He remembered James leaving a bag of coins behind every time they raided Honeydukes. It was not in James's nature to steal, it seemed. But Remus didn't think this was a particularly fair assessment, when James had never needed to steal. He was the heir to an enormous fortune, just like Sirius. And the truth was, you just never knew what you were capable of until you tried it. It must be very easy to be good when you had no reason not to be. Still, Remus had resolved never to tell the other marauders what he'd got up to that summer, and spent the rest of his journey daydreaming about all of the Christmas and birthday presents he would finally be able to buy his friends. Remus's Hogwarts trunk this year was stuffed full with cigarette boxes and pouches of tobacco. Plenty to get a little business up and running, if he was savvy enough. He might be rid of most of it by Christmas. They were allowed to go to Hogsmeade this year, and Matron had signed his permission slip without a fuss. Even Madame Pomfrey thought it was probably safe enough for him to go. Matron, it seemed, had learnt her lesson. She accompanied Remus as far as King's Cross, then left him there, with a curt goodbye. Heart pounding as much as it had 2 years ago, Remus flew at the ticket barrier, and exhaled only once arrived safely on the other side. He was home again. It did not take him long to spy Sirius, who was slouching against a station pillar beside his family. Mrs. Black was fussing all over Regulus, who looked paler than usual, and was standing with his back very straight as Walpurga combed his hair and hissed in his ear. She was obviously ignoring her eldest son, whose hair looked deliberately messy, and whose robes were artfully rumpled and out of place. Remus thought it best not to approach. "Hiya, Moony." He was clapped on the back, and turned around to see James and Peter grinning at him. James had grown a few inches, and his face looked slightly thinner, but he had the same bright brown eyes and the same mop of black hair. Peter looked himself, though he seemed to be recovering from a rather painful sunburn. "Hi," Remus grinned back at them, his heart leaping with excitement. Everything just as it should be. The whistle blew, and they climbed into the train to find an empty compartment and wait for Sirius. He was finally allowed to join them at what seemed like the very last minute, and entered the car, muttering darkly to himself. "Keeping up my appearances, my arse." "No change there, then?" James winked at Remus. Sirius looked at them all, and his face split into a smile. That Sirius Black smile. "I thought I'd never see you all again." "Godric, do you always have to be so dramatic?" James punched him on the shoulder, and they all stood up to greet him. "You don't know what she's like," Sirius whined, clasping James's hand in a warm brotherly handshake. Then he saw Remus and smirked mischievously. "Is that you, Moony?" He deliberately craned his neck, raising a hand as if to shield his eyes and peering up. "Can you hear me up there?" "Ha ha," Remus replied, shifting uncomfortably. "I'm the same height as James." "Not any more, you're not," James countered, standing closer to Remus so that he could see that he was indeed half an inch taller than the dark-haired boy. "Yeah. How did I end up being mates with two beanpoles, huh?" Sirius grinned, slapping Remus on the back playfully. "Lucky I've got you, huh, Petey boy?" Peter looked up from his pasty, confused. Peter Pettigrew looked no taller than he had been when they were all 11, though he was considerably wider. Sirius appeared to be growing up gracefully and in perfect proportion, which was just typical. He was a little taller, but not lanky like James, slender, but not skinny like Remus. His jaw had broadened over the summer too, the shadow of manhood rising in his features. "Right," James rubbed his hands together as they all sat down. "Now all that's out the way, I say we move on to new business. Plans for the year?" "We have to finish the map," Remus said quickly. That had been playing on his mind for some time. "It's not far off, and I bet we can figure out that homunculus charm if we really put in the effort." "Definitely," James said. "The map is basically our legacy, right? We'll work on it, I promise." "And that other thing," Sirius said very sharply. James and Peter exchanged glances, and Remus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "What other thing?" he asked, frowning. James looked him in the eye, looking very serious. "Just something we were talking about last year. We'll let you know if we decide to go through with it." "Don't want to get you into trouble, Moony," Peter laughed nervously. "Less you know the better, huh?" Remus took umbrage to this. Hadn't he got away with participating in most of last year's pranks, and had the least attentions? And hadn't he been the only one to attempt to talk to Narcissa about Sirius's family problems? Of course, the others didn't know about that. If they had a secret, he could have one too. He looked out the window, testily, ignoring the rest of the conversation. Finally, Peter sighed heavily. "Where's the trolley witch? I'm hungry." "I just saw you finish a pasty," James replied, mildly annoyed because he'd been midway through explaining his plan to bewitch all of the Slytherin Quidditch team's brooms during their next practice. "Yeah, but I fancy something sweet," Peter pouted, emptying out his pockets and only coming up with empty wrappers. Remus saw his chance and finally cheered up a bit. "I've got you sorted, Pete." He dug into his suitcase and pulled out a handful of chocolate bars, dumping them on the empty seat beside him. The other three boys stared at the pile. "What are these?" Sirius picked up a Mars bar, looking suspicious. "Muggle chocolate," Remus said. "They're good. Go on. Won't bite." Pete had already unwrapped and bitten into a Milky Way, and was grinning encouragingly at the others. Remus selected a packet of Maltesers for himself, sitting back with satisfaction, knowing that for once he had brought the snacks on the train. Remus noticed that they were sitting further away from the teacher's table when they took their places for the feast. The first and second years now below them. The marauders found themselves no longer among the youngest students, which gave them an unnecessary sense of pride and achievement. "You're taking runes, aren't you, Remus?" Lily asked, plonking herself down next to him. She had cut her hair over the summer, and had a soft fringe, which made her look a bit like Jane Asher. "Yep," he nodded. "Mooney's abandoning us," Sirius wailed comically, pretending to fall onto James's shoulder, sobbing inconsolably. There. James patted his friend's back solemnly. "I hope you're happy, Remus," he scolded. "All very well with you moving on to bigger and better things, but think about us, the little people you're leaving behind." "I'm not leaving anyone behind," Remus muttered, his ears turning red. "Just didn't fancy divination." "Ignore them," Lily said primly, casting a disapproving look at Sirius and James, who were now holding each other, still pretending to weep hysterically as though their hearts were irreparably broken. Lily tutted, seeing she had no effect, and turned back to Remus. "You lot don't have to be attached at the hip all the time. Anyway, I'm doing runes too. Have you done the pre-reading?" Remus nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, it looks really interesting." "Aha!" Sirius looked up slyly. "Now I see." "What?" Remus asked nervously. Sirius had that wicked, unpredictable look in his eyes. "I don't think it has anything to do with furthering your academic career," he scratched his chin wisely. "I think our dearie Mooney has been lured away from everyone's favourite DOS subject by the fairer sex." "Shut up," Remus blushed harder, trying not to look at Lily. Sirius always knew exactly the most embarrassing thing to say. "Yeah, shut up, Black," Lily sighed. "Honestly, you lot can't even be nice to each other. Just because no girls would come near you with a 5-foot barge pole." "I'll have you know I was very recently engaged to be married," Sirius replied, with a swish of his dark hair. James was snorting with laughter now, shoulders shaking. "What else are you taking, Remus?" Lily asked, pointedly ignoring the other marauders. "Care of medical creatures," Remus sighed. He'd already have enough jokes about that from James and Sirius. "Ooh!" Marlene turned around suddenly. "Me and Mary are taking that." "Aha!" Sirius said again, even louder, and James completely fell apart. Fortunately, the sorting began then, and the hall fell silent. The ceremony was extremely dull unless you were involved in it, Remus found, and he struggled to hold back a yawn as the line of frightened first years gradually grew shorter, and the spaces at the top of the Gryffindor table filled up with new students. His attention wandered, and he gazed over at the Slytherin table, where Narcissa was sitting at the far end, regal as a queen, and looking much more cheerful than when he'd seen her last. Regulus, now a second year, sat at the other end from his cousin, looking as bored as Remus felt. Then there was Snape, among the third-year Slytherins, staring at Lily, as usual. He caught her eye once or twice, and Remus saw her smile at him in her usual friendly way, but it didn't seem to brighten Severus's mood one bit. Only Lily could remain friends with someone that's miserable, Remus thought to himself. The feast, when it appeared, was as delicious and as welcome as ever. Remus had his customary 2 helpings of everything, including pudding, and once the meal was finished, Dumbledore gave his usual speech. For the past 2 years, Remus had switched off for this portion of the evening, being too full of good food and too sleepy from the long day to pay much attention. But something about the serious tone of the headmaster's usually playful oration made him listen. He saw that he was not the only one. There was a low, ominous muttering from the Slytherin table, particularly those in the upper years. The Gryffindors around Remus seemed to straighten up a little more too. "What was all that about?" Remus asked as they left the hall for their dorms, Dumbledore's confusing warning ringing in his ears. "Unity in the face of darkness, and all that." "All right, you won't know," James said quietly, He looked at Sirius, who was scuffing his feet, hands in his pockets. "Tell you when we're alone, okay?" They waited to get that year's password, Codswallop, and headed straight up the stairs to their familiar dorm room. All of their beds were made, their trunks sitting by, and Remus felt a surge of happiness as he entered. Sirius began to unpack at once, pulling his beloved Muggle records and books from James's trunk. James only unpacked his broom and began to polish it lovingly, sitting cross-legged on his bed. "So," Remus asked impatiently, "the weird speech?" "Oh, yeah." James swallowed. He glanced at Sirius again, who appeared to be ignoring them. James sighed, running his hands through his hair. "It's all politics, really." "Politics?" Remus groaned inwardly. He didn't know that much about Muggle politics, let alone whatever went on in the wizarding world, other than the Statute of Secrecy, which they had covered in their first-year history. There was a referendum coming up about Britain joining the European community, but that wasn't for another few years. And if Remus had understood the Prime Minister's speech correctly, he couldn't see how that affected wizards very much. "Well, you know there are, dark wizards." "Yeah." Remus tried to look knowledgeable. He remembered reading something briefly about Grindelwald, but they wouldn't be studying that until they're owls. "There's been a surge in dark magic lately, that's all. And my dad told me there's some stuff going on at the Ministry. Department heads pushing for stricter reforms against Muggle-born wizards and people who are different. Dad said it was nothing to worry about, just the usual old prejudices. But I suppose Dumbledore thinks we need to be on our guard." "Mother and Father called a meeting," Sirius said suddenly. They both turned to look at him. He looked tormented, ashamed, and would not meet their eyes. "They wouldn't let me in, obviously. But Reg went. They kept talking about this Dark Lord. I don't know, maybe a politician they want to back in the next election. All I know is if the Blacks are supporting him, then he can't be good." Even James didn't have anything positive to say in light of this announcement. They were all quiet until Peter spoke up. "We're at Hogwarts," he said. "My mum's always said Hogwarts is the safest place in Britain. And we've got Dumbledore," he said firmly, settling the matter. "Come on, Black. Bet you've got another awful Muggle record that you're just dying to assault our ears with." They all looked at Peter with mild surprise. Sirius grinned. "Actually," he said, dusting off his record player, "I have." End of chapter 41.